What every pregnant mom should know about fetal deaths in car crashes. In this video, Jim explains exactly why more than 2 unborn babies are killed by the seat belts every day in car crashes, and what you can do to help stop it.
Hi, my name is Jim Hofferberth. During the 1970s, I was the director of the Office of Crashworthiness at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in Washington, D.C. I was responsible for overseeing the formulation of the federal crash survival safety standards for everything from airbags to motorcycle helmets, including the family of crash test dummies. At that time, NHTSA was actively promoting the adoption of mandatory belt usage laws by the states. Their 2 biggest problems were that people didn't want to be forced to buckle up, and the fact that seat belts were known to injure or kill the fetuses of pregnant women. NHTSA was fully aware of the dilemma the belts posed for pregnant women and had even sponsored tests with live pregnant baboons that clearly demonstrated the problem. I was at the meeting at NHTSA when it was decided, over my objections, to ignore the copious data on seatbelt-caused fetal deaths as part of their effort to promote the adoption of belt usage laws by the states. I was assured that the problem would be addressed once belt usage rates had risen and stabilized. That never happened. A few years ago, a group of epidemiologists at the Center for Injury Prevention and Control at the University of Pittsburgh conducted several studies to find out what was happening in the real world relative to fetal injury and death in car crashes. They reported that car crashes are the leading cause of traumatic fetal death. In fact, they reported that 82% of all traumatic fetal deaths occurred in car crashes. The work was not easy, because fetal deaths are usually not included in the statistical records, but by reviewing the narrative records, they were able to estimate that there are between 350 and 700 fetal deaths in car crashes every year, and that was in the last 20 weeks of the pregnancy. What happened in the first 20 weeks is unknown. In addition, they projected that there were approximately 125 0 to 1-year-old toddlers killed in car crashes per year. That means that on the trip to the hospital, the fetus is at 5 times the risk of being killed in a crash than its 0 to 1-year-old sibling. Why is this happening? In large part, it's because most 1-year-olds are using child or infant carriers, and many of them are in the rear seat, which is inherently safer than the front seat. It's also because the fetus is much more fragile than a young child, and as we shall see, the placenta is at high risk very early in the pregnancy. This is the picture that has been used to illustrate the correct placement of the belts by a pregnant woman. It shows the lap belt on top of the woman's legs. This is an X-ray of a full-term fetus with the lap belt on top of the woman's legs. This is the uterus with the baby head down, ready for delivery. The top of the uterus is called the fundus, and that's where the placenta is normally attached to the inner wall of the uterus. It's possible for the mom to push the belt lower between her legs, but it won't stay there, and if it did, it would pull back directly into the baby's head as she slides forward in a crash. At 10 miles per hour, the belt penetrates into the abdomen, but is unlikely to injure the fetus. At 16 miles per hour, the legs pull forward as the belt stops the mom's body. This causes the pelvis to rotate, which allows the belt to slip upward over the iliac crest. This is inevitable above about 10 miles per hour, and it helps explain why the likelihood of fetal death abruptly increases to 26% at this speed. At 22 miles per hour, there's about a 50% likelihood that the baby will be killed by the seat belts in a crash. At 28 miles per hour, there's over a 75% likelihood that the belts will kill the baby outright, and the mom is very likely to be seriously injured. At 34 miles per hour, the baby will be killed outright 90% of the time, and the mom is likely to survive only if she is taken to a hospital very quickly. At 16 weeks, the fetus is usually head up and below the iliac crests. Here we see the lap belt on top of the mom's legs and tucked back against the front of the mom's belly. We also see the placenta, which is normally attached to the top of the uterus. In a crash, the mom slides forward on the seat as the car stops, and the lap belt pulls directly back into the top of the uterus, frequently damaging the placenta. Placental abruption is the leading cause of traumatic fetal death. Many of them probably occur as soon as or before the mother is aware that she's pregnant. These early terminations can occur in very low-speed crashes, and they are probably written off as miscarriages. They are not included in our projections of fetal death. In fact, the fetal deaths we know about are probably just the tip of the iceberg. It's clearly not possible to conduct tests like this with pregnant women. We are forced to test with healthy young male volunteers and human cadavers. This is a 16-mile-per-hour sled test with a young male volunteer. He is in good physical condition, and he is pushing on the footrest as hard as he can in an effort to prevent submarining of his pelvis under the lap belt. Although the quality of the video is poor, it can be clearly seen that the young man's pelvis submarines under the belt. This 16 miles per hour test is the most severe test we can perform with the human volunteer for two reasons. The pain level would be too severe at higher levels, and because he can't prevent his pelvis from submarining under the belt. This is the onset of the high probability of severe abdominal injury. For more severe tests, we switch to human cadaver subjects. This is a 30-mile-per-hour test with a human cadaver using the lap and shoulder belts. Pay attention to the severe submarining of the pelvis under the lap belt and the gross distension of the abdomen both over and under the belt. This tendency would be greatly exaggerated if the subject was a pregnant woman with an enlarged abdomen. The likelihood of severe injury or death to both the mother and her unborn child caused by the belts would be extremely high. Because this is a cadaver, you may wonder what effect muscle action would have on the outcome. As you saw in the human volunteer test, tensing the muscles has little influence on the outcome. The belt forces are in the thousands of pounds, and the muscles are ineffective. Once again, at 16 miles per hour, there's a 26% probability that the baby will be killed, and at 34 miles per hour, there's a 90% likelihood that the baby will die in a crash. And it doesn't stop there. There's a whole list of fetal injuries that don't cause immediate fetal death. And there's another list of adverse outcomes that show up after the baby is born, including neonatal death. I want to be very clear about this. I am not recommending that anyone not buckle up when they're in a car. That would put them in violation of the state mandatory belt usage laws. However, it's a little-known fact that all cars manufactured for sale in the United States are required to meet the very high level of safety performance required by the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards without buckling the seat belts. Therefore, if a pregnant mom took it upon herself not to buckle up, she would still have the very high level of protection required by the federal safety standards, and her unborn baby would not face the likelihood of being killed by the belts. If the mom is on the passenger side, her baby would still have a relatively high level of protection, but if the mom is driving, both the steering wheel airbag and the steering wheel itself are problematic. There are ways to provide a much higher level of protection for the fetus. This can be accomplished by providing a hard, helmet-like shell that covers the entire abdomen. The shell is structured to prevent the lap belt from penetrating into the abdomen by directing the lap belt forces directly to the pelvic bone, one of the strongest bones in the human body. The shell would effectively serve as a pelvic yoke that transfers most of the lap belt force directly to the iliac crests of the pelvis, while maintaining a protected chamber to safely house the mom's uterus during the crash. The upper part of the device protects the abdomen and uterus from impact by the steering wheel and prevents the shock of airbag inflation from injuring the fetus. In addition, the crotch post of the yoke would apply sufficient force to the bony pubis to prevent the pelvis from rotating and submarining under the lap belt. The device is called the Supplemental Automotive Restraint System for pregnant women. It does exist in prototype form, but in the absence of a federal standard specifying performance requirements for such a device, the risk of liability claims precludes its distribution. I have petitioned NHTSA multiple times to issue such a standard, but they have declined with a misleading statement that the belts provide protection for both the mother and her unborn child. In the meantime, there will continue to be more than 2 unnecessary fetal deaths every day, as well as many more unnecessary fetal injuries and placental abruptions. You can help make this device available by submitting a petition for rulemaking to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to immediately initiate rulemaking to accomplish 2 things. Number 1. Develop female crash test dummy to represent a full-term pregnant woman. The abdomen would be filled with a flexible, non-elastic bladder, filled with frangible, thin-shell glass spheres, approximating small incandescent electric light bulbs, 1 inch in diameter, filled with red liquid and suspended in a gelatin matrix. In addition, the dummy would be equipped with a force measuring transducer at the location of the bony pubis. Number 2. Issue a federal motor vehicle safety standard requiring new motor vehicles manufactured for sale in the United States to be certified to undergo a full-scale vehicle crash at 30 miles per hour against a rigid barrier using the pregnant female dummy without breaking any of the frangible objects inside the bladder, and provide sufficient force against the bony pubis to prevent submarining of the pelvis under the belt. You can get the most up-to-date version of this video and an editable copy of the petition at either of the URLs shown above. You can also help if you have ever been in an accident when you were pregnant. Since fetal injuries and deaths are not reported in the official reports, we know very little about what is actually happening in the real world. If you would fill out a brief report about what happened in the accident and what injuries you and your unborn baby incurred, it would be very helpful in our continuing efforts to fix this problem. In addition, the car companies are deluged with lawsuits for not informing pregnant moms of the risk of fetal injury or death caused by the seat belts in a crash. They readily settle such cases to avoiding going to court where knowledge of the problem would be available to the public. You probably have a very strong case for a substantial settlement, and I will be happy to refer you to a reputable law firm who handles such cases on a regular basis. Just mark yes on the fetal accident report, which is available at either of the websites shown above, and email it to james@hofferberth.org. Thanks for watching, and be sure to print petition for rulemaking on the face of the envelope when you mail your petition to NHTSA. And please forward this video to all of your contacts, especially women who either are or may be pregnant in the future.